Hello and welcome to the National Museum of the Pacific War. My name is Jacqueline Mertz and I am the Museum Programs Coordinator here. For today's webinar, we have Mr. Chris McDougal and Dr. Donna Esposito, who will each share a story of navigating through the mysteries of finding information about a World War II veteran. Mr. Chris McDougal is the Director of Archives and Library at the National Museum of the Pacific War. He earned a BS in History from the University of Hawaii and completed an MLS at the University of North Texas. In his current position, Mr. McDougal oversees an archive that preserves more than 1,000 linear feet of documents, publications, photographs, and recordings contributed by Pacific War veterans and their families over the past 50 years. Dr. Donna Esposito grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. She earned an undergraduate degree in molecular biology from Lehigh University and a doctorate degree in genetics from Cornell University. Donna has previously served as director of the Library and Archives at the Empire State Aerosciences Museum in Glenville, New York, and as a historian and researcher with the nonprofit organizations Pacific Rex and Sea Lark Exploration. In addition to her personal writing and research projects, she volunteers as a writer and researcher for the South Pacific World War II Museum in Vanuatu. Thank you both for being here with us today. We're going to start with Dr. Esposito and her presentation.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for being here today, and thank you for the nice introduction, Jacqueline. So I've been very fortunate for the past few years to be a volunteer for another museum whose focus is telling the story of the Pacific War. And today I'm going to tell you about one of the mysteries that I've worked for them. So it turns out I've kind of turned into their dog tag sleuth and kind of a World War II Nancy Drew. So the South Pacific World War II Museum is located in the island nation of Vanuatu, which you might be familiar with as New Hebrides. During World War II, there was a huge American base there, and many, many thousands of US military personnel went through Vanuatu, or the New Hebrides, on the way to action further north. And if you've never looked at the South Pacific World War II Museum's website, I really encourage you to take a look. It's a fantastic museum. They have a beautiful website, great social media. Please check them out. So a couple years back, they acquired a new set of dog tags for a display that they were making in the museum. Just a typical set of naval officers' dog tags. They knew nothing about the person whose tags they belonged to, and they didn't know where he'd served or anything. So they turned to me and asked if I could do a little bit of digging. So the tags belong to a naval officer named Francis Aloysius Mahan. And dog tags have a great deal of information, including service numbers, inoculation dates, blood type. So right away, I looked up Francis Mahan and found some information about him. So I was able to find his draft card right away, and I'm going to be showing you some archival documents in the course of this presentation that you could also look up for your own relatives who served in World War II or some other veteran that you're interested in. And I'll just point out that a lot of these items are available from Ancestry.com and Fold3. And you don't necessarily have to have a subscription to those sites. I encourage you to go to your local library, and they likely have access to those sites. And a lot of these things are also directly available from the National Archives website. So here's Frank Mahan's draft registration card, which contains a lot of information about where he was born and living when he registered for the draft. And next, I went to newspapers.com, another site you could access probably through your library, and found his obituary. Well, he was from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he owned a historic colonial era house called Harriton House, which is now a museum. So this obituary was fascinating because it mentioned that he belonged to a very interesting unit during World War II called Stag 1, Special Task Air Group 1, which was a unit that flew drones. And this, we'll talk about in a minute, is a very, very interesting unit. So Frank was from Philadelphia, enlisted in the new US Navy in December of 1942, was a little bit older than most of the people, had a college education, was assigned to Stag 1 as a radio communications officer, and served with that unit throughout the course of its life until it was disbanded in November 1944. He was later assigned to airfields on Espiritu Santo, where the museum that has his dog tags is today, which is very nice, and also later on Saipan. Well, he returned home in October 1945, and he kept his photo album and home movies that he filmed during his time overseas. And due to the foresight of the curator of Harriton House, Bruce Cooper Gill, those archival documents are now amongst their collections. And here's some wonderful photos of Frank from his photo album. And here he is down on Saipan. You can see a B-29 flying overhead. So I'm going to tell you very briefly about Stag 1. It's a fascinating project. Drones are so common now for us, but a lot of people don't realize that they originated before World War II, and there were several different drone projects during the war. If you're interested in this aspect of aviation, I really encourage you to go to Google, and you're going to find some really interesting resources online that will tell you more about this history. So Stag 1 flew a TDR-1 drone built by Interstate Aircraft. Here's some photos, the first and second photo on the side. It was a pretty large plane, a twin engine plane. And interestingly, it was very lightweight and made with a tubular steel frame made by Schwinn Bicycle, covered with plywood skin made by Wurlitzer Organ, who would make beautiful organs and jukeboxes of pressed wood. And it could carry a bomb or a torpedo. It had a cockpit and it could be flown by a pilot, but it could also be controlled by a joystick in the belly of a TBM Avenger torpedo bomber. So a second pilot would sit in the torpedo bomber and control the plane with the joystick. The drone has a TV camera in its nose and would project that onto a TV screen in the mother control ship. So very fascinating. Stag 1 served throughout the US, but eventually made it overseas in June of 1944, arrived at an island called Bonica, just part of the Russell Islands group of the Solomon Islands, a little bit north of Guadalcanal. And they started practice missions in the summer. And amazingly, these were filmed both in color and black and white. So I suggest if you're interested, go online. You can see these films of the practice missions of these drones flying, and it's very, very interesting. They actually flew 46 combat missions against Japanese bases in the Northern Solomons and New Guinea. And at this point, they were not dropping bombs and returning to their base, but they were actually using the drone as a guided missile, crashing into their targets. And for this reason, the Japanese on the receiving end of these airstrikes, they thought they were dealing with American kamikazes. They didn't realize there was no pilot in these planes. And the group had mixed results, but pretty good considering the new technology, 45% direct hits. So one of the first people to explore the history of Stag 1 was the late historian Henry Sakaida, and he has a great website that included a lot of his research onto this unit. And he communicated with the squadron's commanding officer, Robert F. Jones, back in 1993, so 50 years after their service. And he got this letter back from Lieutenant Commander Jones about the squadron, and he was very, very proud of his unit's history, as was Frank McMahon. And he specifically mentioned there were no KIA, MIA, or POWs. Nobody lost from their unit. So as I delved more into this, I found, however, that the war diary tells a different story. And these Navy units kept war diaries, which are fascinating sources of information. You can find them on the National Archives website, as well as Fold 3. So I was surprised to see that these Stag 1 war diary actually mentions for September 1944, they weren't flying any practice missions. They were using the planes to search for 3 missing pilots. Didn't mention the name of this pilot at all, of these pilots. And I thought, well, maybe it's not even people who were in the unit. But I was pretty curious as to who these missing pilots were. So there were a few resources that I used to try to get some information. One is the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency database. And this is the government agency whose task is to account for the missing of World War II and other conflicts. And that's something I'd recommend checking out their website, especially if you do have a family member who's missing in action. Second, the American Battle Monuments Commission also maintains a database of fallen of World War II, including those who are missing in action. And then also a private website, the aviationarchaeology.com, has a lot of great information on missing aircraft and aircraft that were lost. And so I thought between these 3, I could come up with the planes that were lost and who was flying them. Oddly enough, though, I didn't come across planes that corresponded to men who would have been missing from Stag 1, but I did find 3 US Navy officers lost in the Solomon Islands on that day, September 4th, 1944. However, they weren't lost in aircraft. Doing a little more digging, again, looking at war diaries from 2 different ships, APC 26 and APC 30, I found mentions of these 2 ships looking for 3 missing men of Special Task Air Group 1 who were lost in a sailboat in the Russell Islands. And so the Russell Islands, here's Banika and the larger island Pavuvu. These are surrounded by many tiny islets, and you can see very irregular coastlines. I've sailed around these islands myself in a much larger boat, and I could imagine how easy it would have been to get lost in this area, especially if you ended up drifting out to sea. So I wanted to know the names of these men, and I turned back again to Frank McMahon. Amongst his collection were 2 wonderful photos of the 2 squadrons that made up Stag 1. And in fact, and they were labeled with the names of the pilots. And the 3 men that I found in database search that were missing, in fact, were all amongst the Vk11 pilots, the Vk11 Squadron: Frank Herbert, Julian Johnston, and John L. Barnes. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them. Julian Johnston, Lieutenant Johnston, was actually commanding officer of the squadron. And here's Lieutenant Junior Grade John Lewis Barnes, who happened to be from Amarillo, Texas, as well as Lieutenant Junior Grade Frank L. Herbert Jr. from Miami, Florida. And so I'm going to just focus on one of those men, John Barnes from Texas, and show you a little bit more about him and other things you could find. So first I saw that John Barnes was a control pilot. So he would have been sitting in the belly of the Avenger torpedo bomber, controlling the drone. And this is a document that came from Henry Sakaida's webpage showing their combat operations, including some of their tests, which, as I mentioned, were filmed. And here's Barnes in the name of the control pilot, and he was flying a plane 873. And here, amazingly, is that plane 873. So there's actually film of him controlling this plane in some practice flights. And so I was able to find some more information. He was born in Binghamton, New York on November 30th, 1921. So next month will be the 100th anniversary of his birth. And if you happen to remember on November 20th, think about this fine young man. And his family moved to Amarillo in 1924 when he was just 3. He graduated from Amarillo High School in 1939. Here's some lovely photos of him from the yearbooks, Amarillo High School yearbooks, that are available at ancestry.com. His junior year, 1938, and here 1939 when he's graduating. It says he had performed in the band. He, according to the 1940 census, was working as a newsboy. He later attended Amarillo Junior College and completed the civilian pilot training program in 1941. So he actually had learned to fly before World War II started for us. Another document that I was able to find was a US Navy muster roll that shows that he began his naval aviation cadet training at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi in June of 1942. And these rolls are available for ships. So it's really easy to track somebody this way if they served on a ship. If they did not serve on a ship, you may still be able to find them in this kind of roll. And here's a beautiful picture of John Barnes in the Slipstream Mark II yearbook when he was graduating after becoming a naval aviation cadet. Newspapers, of course, another great way to find information about people. Here, John Barnes is promoted from ensign to lieutenant junior grade in February 1944. And then sadly, September 1944 is an announcement saying that his family's been informed that he's missing in action. And so I then turned to the official military personnel file for John Barnes to find more information. And briefly, these are available from the National Archives in St. Louis. And you may well have heard about the large fire that occurred there in 1973. This fire destroyed most Army and Army Air Force files from World War II. However, Navy and Marine Corps service records were not destroyed. And World War II ones are available to anyone. They're considered archival, so you don't need to be a family member to request them. You can request them online through the National Archives website, or faster ways, usually to use a research service. Families who have missing in action service personnel can request these through the DPAA, which I'd recommend doing. So I'll share a few pieces of information from John Barnes' military file. Again, some more photos, really nice photos that he sent in to apply to be in the Navy, which when he applied right after Pearl Harbor, this was necessary. And then here he is as he's becoming a student naval aviator. So he was assigned to Stag 1, left for overseas duty, and his document includes about 100 pages of different records. One of some really poignant things in there, here's a letter that John Barnes wrote September 15th, just a week after Pearl Harbor, to the Naval Examiner, saying that he would like to join the Navy. And just saying I've worked for my dad as an office boy and did repair work for him. I've had no military training of any kind, but I've completed the government primary and secondary civilian CPT, civilian pilot training courses. So this might be something that you could find, letters written by your own relative, Or here's a reference letter written on his behalf by a former employer at a florist, just 3 days after the Pearl Harbor attack. His character is of the highest type. He's honest, upright, perfect gentleman. And that sentiment was continued on in his fitness evaluations. Here's one signed by the Lieutenant Commander Robert Jones, who 50 years later wrote that letter to historian Henry Sakaida. So he felt that Ensign Barnes was extremely industrious and energetic. Here's his promotion from ensign to lieutenant junior grade, signed by Squadron Commander Julian Johnson, who just a few months later, they would be missing in action together. Another interesting document includes all of his movements to different duty stations. Well, here mentions he's become a qualified shellback. He's crossed the equator at the end of May, and then a couple days later, crossed the international date line and entered into the domain of the Golden Dragon. So if you're not familiar with these ceremonies, particularly the King Neptune ceremony for crossing the equator, that's an interesting thing to look up. And then sadly, there's the telegram that was sent to his family saying that he's missing in action. And it actually does say that he's missing in a sailboat in the performance of his duty. He was on authorized leave. And so it was, I thought, a little bit unusual. It was followed up later by a much more in-depth letter to his family, giving more details about how he was missing and the efforts that were put into finding him and his two squadron mates. And frankly, from what I've seen, this is actually a lot more information than a lot of families of MIAs receive. One last file that you might unfortunately be able to look at is an individual deceased personnel file, which are kept on all the deceased from all branches of service during World War II. It's available from the National Archives, and it was not affected by the fire. So if you have an Army or Army Air Force person that you'd like to look up who didn't survive the war, this file would be available. You can request it online or through a research service. And again, if you have an MIA family member, you can get this file from the DPAA, and I strongly recommend you do that. The contents can vary quite a lot. John Barnes' file, his IDPF file, was very short, but it did include the fact that he was officially declared dead a year and a day after his disappearance, 5th day of September 1945. And so he's memorialized along with the other missing, the walls of the missing at the Manila American Cemetery in Manila. And so I think this kind of takes us back to Frank McMahon, because amongst his photo albums were several pictures, and in fact some films of people in sailing boats. Here's Frank McMahon, an unidentified friend, in a very small sailboat. Based on the scenery in the background, I think it's very likely that this is the Russell Islands. And I think it's pretty easy to see how a tiny little boat like this could go off course. And I think the moral of this is, in wartime, even recreation could prove deadly. So many people were lost to accidents of all kinds. And these men were out there serving their country, and many men and women were lost in accidents. And I think it's important to remember their sacrifices today. So I want to thank you for listening and acknowledge the folks at the South Pacific World War II Museum in Vanuatu. Please check out their website and consider supporting their mission, becoming a member. They are a nonprofit organization as well. And also want to thank especially Harrington House, Bruce Cooper Gill, for sharing all of Frank McMahon's archival documents and photos with me. And so I will end the presentation now, and thank you so much for giving me this chance to share this story with you.
All right. Greetings, everyone. Glad you're here today. This is a topic that is near and dear to me. I'm very passionate about doing genealogy research about my own family, and I'm very passionate about the work that I do here at the museum. Quite often the two passions that I have intersect, and that's something that we'll be talking about here a little bit later. First, this is my overview of what I will be talking about today. I will be talking a little bit about our archives, the genealogy resources in the archives, other resources that I go to when I can't find any information about something in our own collection. And then I will wind up with an example, a very interesting example of a research request. This is our archives. The picture on the right shows everything that's been processed and formally added to the archives. Our archives contains primarily the material related to individuals who served. We don't have complete records for all of the individuals that served during the war in the Pacific. We don't have personnel files. We don't have complete lists for what everybody did during the war. Everything is pretty much tied to specific individuals, but sometimes that can bleed over to other individuals as well. I will talk about that here shortly. Here are the examples of the primary resources that I go to when individuals reach out to me with genealogy related requests. We have quite a few yearbooks. These were produced at the end of graduating classes in the Army, Marines, and Navy sometimes. We also have unit histories. We have photographs that show graduating classes. We have newsletters. There's an example of one right there in the center with the word scuttlebutt above it. That is a very interesting example. It shows the marriage of a couple who worked at the Pearl Harbor Navy base during the war. And there's a small little obit that's to the upper right. Sometimes these can have very unique pieces of information that you can't find anywhere else. We also have special publications that were published primarily towards the end of the war, mimeographed histories. Sometimes these can have awards lists, rosters, unique information that couldn't be found anywhere else. When I can't find something in our own archive, sometimes I go to these other resources here online. As previously spoken about by Dr. Esposito, Ancestry.com has a wealth of information related to military service. Those Navy muster rolls are wonderful. They do cover most individuals who served on ships during the war. They also have the Marine Corps muster rolls. Bonus applications, in particular, Iowa and Pennsylvania. Most states that I'm aware of offered some sort of bonus to military service members after they returned from the war. And Iowa and Pennsylvania are available there on Ancestry. These can have wonderful bits of information about where individuals served, what time frame. I believe they may even have information about awards received. And military headstone forms. That's another database that's available there. That can provide information about units served in or family members. You may be able to make a connection to a family member on those. NavSource is another great resource for information about ships. They have information, at least basic information about every single ship that would have been deployed during the war in the Pacific. Sometimes these can have crew photos, but more than anything else, they have photographs of the ships themselves. So if you at least knew what ship they were on, you can find information about a ship and what it looked like. The Bangor, Maine Public Library has, I believe most, if not all, of their unit histories and cruise books available for free download online. They've scanned all of them. You just go to the website, see if they have something. If they do, you can download it in PDF format. So now on to my example. Before I really dig into that, though, there's a little bit of background information that I need to speak to. To the left there, you can see the battle at Leyte Gulf. All that busyness there. Japanese are in red, American forces are in blue. This is considered the largest Navy battle ever. During that battle, very critical, crucial battle, series of battles actually, this message to the right was sent from Admiral Nimitz's headquarters to Admiral Halsey, who was in charge of the American Navy forces. The message there kind of seems mundane to a degree, but at the very beginning and at the very end are two critical parts. Those are called padding on these messages. Thousands of these messages were sent out during the war to ships and headquarters. The very first part, that first piece of padding, turkey trots to water, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. It doesn't make any sense. It's supposed to be nonsensical. And just in case the message was intercepted, that way it just would mess things up for whoever was trying to read it. The last part says the world wonders. That makes sense, and it's not supposed to. And the message, when it was received by Admiral Halsey, they removed that first part and left the whole rest of it. They weren't supposed to do that. They were supposed to remove that last part, that last piece of padding. So when Halsey received it, it enraged him. He thought that Admiral Nimitz was questioning what he did or why he did it. All that Admiral Nimitz was trying to do was find out where he was located, which is that main body of the message. Where is Task Force 34? That's all he was trying to find out. Well, that message was sent by an unrecognized communications officer in Admiral Nimitz's headquarters. For decades after the event, nobody knew who that officer was. In 2018, historian Richard Frank was here at the archives doing some research for a series of books that he's writing. And he learned about a memoir that we have, a privately published memoir that seemed to indicate who that individual was that sent the message. He had a look at the memoir and found the portion in it. By the way, the memoir was written by a gentleman by the name of Elmer Ottinger. Elmer Ottinger during the war was the security officer for communications at SINCPAC headquarters. So he quite obviously would have been aware of that incident and who was involved. The name that Mr. Frank found in that memoir was a gentleman supposedly by the name of Dan Coster, Coster. Mr. Frank gave me that information and asked me if I could confirm whether or not there was a Mr. Coster assigned to CPAC headquarters. Now, like I've explained, we don't have a plethora of documents that cover all aspects of the war, but we do have some, and because of Admiral Nimitz, we do have some small collections related to individuals that served at CPAC headquarters. So I went to our collection. I was able to find this record. It's a roster, it's a watch roster that shows the individuals who are working in communications at CPAC headquarters during the time period that this incident took place in October of 1944. When I scanned the names, I didn't see Mr. Coster, but what I did find was a J.B. Castor. And I assumed that maybe possibly Mr. Ottinger could have gotten the name wrong just by recalling what it sounded like, not how it was actually spelled. So I took that information and I went to ancestry.com. They are, with their algorithm, they can find something that sounds similar name-wise. You don't always have to have the spelling right. So when I put in Dan Coster, the records there to the left is what I found. That's one of the Iowa bonus records that I was talking about. And it is for a John Donald Castor. And interestingly enough, these records are pretty detailed, and it indicates what ships Castor was on. One of the ships that's listed is the USS Northampton. And I knew that USS Northampton had been sunk in 1942, was a tragic major event, well documented. And that was of particular note because of something that was also mentioned in the memoir about this Dan Coster. Supposedly, he had been elevated from the enlisted ranks to an officer position because of some sort of act of valor that he performed during the war. So, considering that the Northampton had been sunk, and that this Dan Coster, or Don Coster, had been on the ship at that time, it seemed like a possibility that could have presented an opportunity for an act of bravery. Over to the right is something else that I found, a newspaper article from Mr. Castor's hometown in Iowa. And the interesting bit of information that I found there is that he was referred to as Don Castor. So that really seemed to kind of cinch the deal there. Instead of Dan Coster, it's instead Don Castor. These are also muster records, as previously referenced. The record on the left is from the USS Northampton, and that also confirmed that Castor was on the ship as a radioman. I did not know that until this point. The record to the right indicates approximately when he was elevated in rank from an enlisted man to an ensign. With all of that information, it occurred to me that we had a collection in the archives here at the museum that was related to the USS Northampton sinking. It's a compilation of anecdotes from the survivors of the ship. So I went to that compilation, and inside of it, amazingly, was a recollection by the officer in charge of the Radio Shack on Northampton. In that recollection, he detailed what he and enlisted man Castor did during the sinking. When the order to abandon ship was given, both he and Castor destroyed the code machines and got rid of the code books in order to prevent the Japanese from getting them and being able to decrypt our messages, American messages. So that made sense to me that could be the act of bravery that he performed. When I had all of this information gathered together, which took me about 2 days to put together, I sent this off to Mr. Frank, and this is the response that I received. He was absolutely blown away that I accomplished all this over just a couple of days, and he looked it over, confirmed it, and that was the discovery of the message center.
Okay, well, thank you both for sharing your experiences. We had a lot of comments from our audience, but we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start with my first question. And this is to both of them. Dr. Esposito, you talked about the 1973 fire that destroyed a lot of Army records. So how does someone go about finding that information on a family member who was a part of the Army in World War II?
Well, you can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You can go ahead and request what records are available. In all likelihood, you'll just get a final pay stub, which will at least tell you the unit that your person was serving in, which might be the big breakthrough that you need, because it can be really hard to find information about someone who served in the Army. And so you can get, once you have that unit, you can then explore unit records. And depending on whether they served in an infantry unit, an Army Air Force squadron, it could vary quite a bit. But there are things like after action reports and daily morning reports available for like infantry units, for instance, infantry regiments. And so it kind of depends, but the information is out there, but possibly not in the detailed level that you might find for somebody in the Navy or the Marine Corps. I don't believe that the same kind of diaries and muster rolls were kept for the Army. I'll just add the other place to find information once you know that unit is it could be a website, it could be a museum, something dedicated to that specific unit. And a lot of like reunion associations might maintain a website for a specific Army infantry division or infantry regiment or squadron or bomb group. And they have already gone and digitized a lot of records and may have them available. So that'd be my suggestion. I think Chris probably has some other ideas on that one as well.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that it would be best to go ahead and contact the Personnel Records Center anyway. I'm aware of their ability to create some sort of composite record. They can search through their other repositories and at least give you some basic information with which you can use or go approach other archives like the one here or elsewhere, and maybe build off of that basic information that they provide you. And reunion groups, that too is a great resource. And our archives contains a lot of information, a lot of newsletters, and basic information from reunion groups. So we may have something here too as well.
Okay, so our next question is from Merlin. Is it known or suspected that the communications officer actually wrote the padding on the TF-34 message, or was he just responsible for sending it? This is going to go to you, Chris.
It's assumed that he actually wrote it.
Okay. This is from Wendy, and this is going to you, Dr. Esposito. Were ETP's Electronics Training Program graduates involved in building the drones?
No, the drones were built at interstate factories, and it was interesting. I mean, I'm not aware specifically of electronics training program people. However, that may well be the case. So the drones themselves were built by interstate, and using those components that I mentioned, the Schwinn bicycle frame and the Wurlitzer organ skin, but the factory workers who were building the airframe had no idea that they were making an unmanned aircraft. They thought they were making an airplane, and they saw them fly away from the factory, and they thought they made an airplane. So it was really top secret. And so the camera and the TV camera and the TV screen receiver were only fitted in later at another place. So I guess I don't have the details of who specifically did all of that. But there's actually a couple of really good websites that I think I've listed in there that have some good information more on the specifics of the drones themselves.
Okay. This question is from Ruth Ann. It's directed towards you, Chris. How often do you get inquiries from families or historians?
I receive them on a regular basis, seemingly every week. I may receive 2 to 3 each week. Quite often, they are from individuals seeking information, genealogy related.
Okay. Wendy just has a plethora of questions for us. This is great. Thank you, Wendy. Wendy's asking, it's more probably for me to answer, but is this PowerPoint going to be available for download after the presentation? Yes, we can definitely make it available to you and any other registrants that are interested. I will make sure that I get the PowerPoint from Dr. Esposito by end of day, and we will make sure that is available. And so she also has another one. Are we able to obtain copies of the memoir recollections booklet of stories of the survivors of the sinking of the USS Northampton?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if she wants to just reach out to me via email or call me, I can make that happen.
Okay. This is from Colin. This is again for Chris. He might have missed this part, but he was asking, when did Castor die? And do you think he knew of his own legend? Do you think he might have been punished for it while still in the Navy?
As far as punishment wise, we don't know for sure, but I think it's interesting that I believe Admiral Nimitz himself tried to keep a lid on who the individual was. I mean, that's why it's been a mystery all these years. He did not punish him, make an example of him so that everybody knew who he was. As far as when he passed away in the early 2000s. And as far as we know, he didn't relate to anybody that incident happened.
Okay. This is from Suzanne. She has a record of her father being aboard APD-14 high-speed transport, and he had been in a landing craft training sometime in June 1943. And then the next mention was December 23rd, 1944, with a dog tag application. He did tell her that his landing craft was shot up and he landed with the Marines and the Aussies he had never met. And she was just wondering, where is the best location to find the information for that missing time period?
You could order his service record. And that's what I would recommend doing. And that'll have the most complete set of information. You know, if you do, so he was in the Navy. If I'm understanding this correctly, he was in the Navy. And so I would definitely recommend checking out ancestry.com. Like I mentioned before, you might be able to get access through your local library. There's just a ton of information on there, and I would suspect you might be able to find him on other muster rolls.
This is from Ron. He is asking, what happened to the ensign?
Well, he wasn't demoted. He wasn't kicked out of the Navy. He actually put in his 20 years and retired from the Navy.
Okay. This is another question from Ruth Ann for Dr. Esposito. When you research someone for your own reasons, do you pass along info to that family?
Often, yes. So I've sometimes reached out to families and given them that information. And most of the times I end up researching people because their families I've somehow gotten in contact with their families and they've asked me to research them. So, but I generally do share that with families.
So we have another question about finding information from David. He's looking for some records of a 41st Infantry Division, other units. Is it again Ancestry, or do you really need to find the names? Do the names really make a difference when trying to find information on a division or a regiment?
Those records, though, there may be naval records, even though they're Army infantry men. There may be a listing of passengers on those ships. I found it to be kind of spotty, but it's a possibility that you might find ships that kept a list of passengers that would include Army personnel on them.
Okay. This is a next question from Charles. Do you have any information on the Pacific Lighter missions of World War II? And I guess that can be for both of you.
We do have some basic information, but as far as to particulars about personnel assigned to units, we probably don't have that.
Yeah, I haven't researched anybody who served in one of those units, so I can't say that I have any, that I've uncovered anything special there. So it sounds like it's an area that's ripe for somebody to dig into. It's certainly not something you hear a lot about in the Pacific.
Okay, well, Charles, you may have a project on your hands if you're interested in finding more information on those Pacific Lighter missions. So I think we're all out of questions, so we're going to wrap it up. But thank you again, Dr. Esposito and Mr. McDougal, for spending your time with us and giving us your experience of trying to find those World War II veterans with little information, and for answering all those questions. We hope that you all learned something as well, our audience, and is able to put forth some detective skills and learn something about your family members. Thank you to everyone for your ongoing support for the museum and our programs, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.